Hello everyone. Welcome to mentormags channel. The channel where you get to learn something new and gain lots of insights and add to your body of knowledge. I enjoy making these videos and I hope you gain immensely from watching them. Today's topic is quite a deep subject about encryption. So, in order to understand encryption, which runs the world today, the world of internet, it's important to trace the history of numbers. Do you know how the numbers were invented? Who invented these numbers? And how did these numbers find their way into computer code? Zeros and ones. Well, that is the story that we're going to be speaking about today. Let's get started. The story of numbers and encryption. Well, let me take you back in time. And the time is 5th century BC. 5th century AD. I'm sorry. So, in the 5th century, great astronomers and mathematicians like Aryabhatta, Brahmagupta, and several others were responsible for the Hindu number system, which included the zero. So, you have 0 and the 9 digits 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These numbers are found in the Devanagari script, which is in Hindi, as well as in Tamil. So the ancient Indian languages were having evidence of these numbers. And around the same time, in Rome, the number system was being invented, which were called as the Roman numerals, which we all know as 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. However, the Roman numerals did not have a zero. So, can you imagine today's computer code or computer science without a zero? Because the base of the computer code is what we call as the binary, 0 and 1. So, this is the first insight that the number system was born in India, and from India it traveled through the Arabs and the Persians into Central Asia. So from 5th century to up to 8th century, the Arabs and Persians mastered the art of using the Indian number system, and they wrote several texts in Persian and Arabic to expand their body of knowledge in astronomy, in geometry, algebra, so on and so forth. And in the 8th century, you had the Arabs enter Europe through the Mediterranean. Islam followed. And the Arabs called the zero as sifr. Zero, sifr. And that is where we get the English word cipher. So, and cipher means code, decipher, decode, encipher, encode. So, the Arabs in the 8th century took the Hindu-Arabic number system to Mediterranean Europe. And they did not gain a lot of acceptance, primarily because the Arabs brought in Islam to Europe and there was a lot of power struggle between the Islamic rulers and the erstwhile rulers of the European kingdoms. Well, over time, things moved in Europe. It took almost 600 years since the number system was invented in India. But eventually, in the 11th century, Europe's economic renaissance began. With the explosion of economic activity, there was more and more trade and commerce, and therefore the need for faster arithmetic calculations. And as the need arose in the 11th century and through the peak of the Renaissance, 13th century, international trade, merchant banking started in Europe. And for international trade, you needed exchange of currency, you needed to calculate the interest rate, and therefore the need for more complex calculations. And this is how merchant bankers made the Hindu-Arabic number system more popular and adopted it vis-a-vis the legacy Roman numbers because of the ease of using arithmetic calculations using the Hindu-Arabic number system. So that is how it slowly diffused into European culture, business and life around the 13th century. And later in Italy, the cradle for merchant banking and for business finance, there was this need to print booklets. And in the 16th century, all the booklets which were printed by the Italians, these arithmetic booklets and manuals found its way into Northern Europe and beyond. And that is how the number system got adopted by UK and Germany and all the other northern states of Western Europe. And the printing press played a very vital role in propagating the new number system. Well, with the onset of the new number system, there was economic reform and it also impacted visual arts because geometry was becoming very popular and based on the new calculations of geometry, beautiful buildings were built all across Europe. So visual arts, architecture, shipbuilding, surveying and engineering, all of this flourished from the 13th to the 17th century. And there was also the synergy between mathematics and astronomy in the 17th century, bringing together a new flavor of innovations within Europe. And this was the fascinating journey of how the Hindu-Arabic number system originated from Central Asia and moved all across Europe. In fact, the Central Asians were far more advanced than the Europeans in the 8th century. And the Indians had already advanced in their worldview of mathematics, astronomy, and they had already formulated the calculation of the pi. They had already proposed that the earth was rotating on its own axis. So things were fairly advanced in India, even in the 5th century. And this is the biggest gift that India has given to the world, the number system. Zeros and ones, the code of binary code of bits and bytes. So that is how the story of the number system looks. Now, how did encryption take place? Cut World.War II. So, what is encryption? In very simple terms, if I want to send a secret message to you, then I need to use what is called as a code. A code which is only known to me and to you. And that is how secret messages can be transmitted. This process of formulating the code is called as encryption. And when you receive the message, when you're able to use the key to the code in order to decrypt the message, in order to decipher the message, that is at the fundamental level the definition of encryption. Of course, today there is very advanced encryption systems operating in the World Wide Web, on your browser pages, and even in your smartphone. But before we get to that, let's try to understand what were the key landmark events which accelerated the discovery and inventions in cryptography, which is a study of encrypting messages. So, in the 1920s, the Germans, they prepared a sophisticated typewriter called as the Enigma. The unique feature of Enigma typewriter was that it was an electrical device, battery operated, and when you type the letters of the alphabet, it would automatically encode with illuminated letters which are not corresponding to the letters that you type. In other words, if you press the letter A, then the illuminated letter may be P. And if you press the letter A after a few moments, the illuminated letter could be letter L. So it had randomness as the key, and the typewriter was producing encrypted messages as the person who was using the Enigma machine. And once the random encryption has been done, the gibberish was transmitted via Morse code to the other German post across the border in a different region or country. And this is how the Germans started to gain advantage over their enemies in World War II. In 1930s, the Polish people, the Poles, especially a brilliant mathematician, Marian Rogowski, he managed to identify the entire process of encryption of the Enigma. He understood that the Enigma typewriters were being distributed by the Germans, and the key to encoding and decoding was being distributed to the German posts in a manual methodology. And he cracked how the entire Enigma typewriter worked and how this process of manual code generation was being sent, or the key generation was being sent to the other German posts. And with that, he created his ability to break into the code, and that was called as the bomba. So, thanks to Marian Rogowski, there was an advancement of the war, and the enemies of the Germans started to gain an advantage in 1930s. Now, in 1940, in the March of 1940, Alan Turing, often regarded as the father of computer science and even the man who started to think about artificial intelligence, the first person to perhaps say that machines could think. Alan Turing in Britain decoded Enigma using his mathematical genius and his ability to break code. And he set up machines which are called as Bomber in Bletchley Park, which stands even today. In fact, today it is an international computer science museum. Now, in 1941, June, the Germans kept on improving their technology, and a Berlin-based company called C. Lorenz AG, they launched SZ40, a modern automated coding machine, and the entire process was automated. And what that meant was there was no need for Morse code anymore. The operator who wants to send a secret message could simply type out the message, and the system would randomize it, encode it, and directly transmit via radio transmitter to the receiving end. And at that point in time, this was a breakthrough. There was no need for a manual key, for a manual piece of paper to be distributed every month in order for people to understand what codes were being transmitted, thereby reducing the amount of threat to hacking and amount of threat to actually penetrating the German code. So the Germans were getting smarter. And in order to catch up, in 1941, July to 1943, there were a series of innovations and inventions within Britain, Bletchley Park. So William Tutt, a British mathematician, he managed to decode Tunny, which was the British name for SZ40. And they built a computer called as Heath Robinson. However, the speed at which SZ40 and the Germans were using SZ40 to generate code and the volume of messages, they were not able to catch up. The British could not catch up in Bletchley Park. Therefore, they had to innovate again. And in 1944, a British inventor, Thomas Flowers, he designed a new computer, perhaps the world's first fully programmable computer, called Colossus, or also referred to as Mark I. And Colossus was able to beat all of the German coded messages coming off SZ40, and because of which the British succeeded in penetrating the German messages, and the D-Day operations were successfully carried out in 1944 on the beaches of Normandy. And this was the counterattack which changed the fate of the Allies in Second World War. And they took France, and then they moved on to occupy other countries in Western Europe, which eventually led to the fall of the Third Reich. So, encryption was extremely important, and the ability to design machines and innovate led to the invention of the modern computer, starting with the Colossus in Bletchley Park. Thanks to the pioneers like Alan Turing, William Tutt, Thomas Flowers, and the Germans for challenging and coming up with machines that can encrypt, at that time, strategic messages which change the entire fate of the World War. So that is how what was invented in 5th century in India gave rise to ingenuity into Europe across the 13th, 17th century, and then in the 20th century, during the World War period, the entire encryption process led to victory. So, I hope you enjoyed this story. I enjoyed presenting it to you. Thank you.